gosh, that's so much passion and so much love for your work na you're still working even if you're sick.
Pogoy admits that those working in his field face stress and burnout due to the pressures to be creative in the face of deadlines. He advises others who are aspiring to make it in the animation industry to take care of their mental and physical health.
Keep your mental health up there and never overwork yourself. Take breaks if you can.
I'm not here to convince you that Sonic Prime was actually this secretly brilliant show everyone just overlooked, because I don't think it is. If you didn't like it, you didn't like it, and that's fine. What I care about isn't necessarily trying to convince people that Prime is without flaws, but to interrogate how a lot of reviews and discussions surrounding it arrived at their criticisms in the first place. The third and final season of Prime released in January of 2024, which is to say it came around as discussions of strikes and advocating for better working conditions in film and animation were still happening. Those issues that necessitated striking are still problems now, but see less media coverage. I think it's a good way to talk about how reviewing can be limited when looking purely at a sort of consumer perspective. So if you're interested, stick around not just for a discussion I hope introduces a different perspective about Sonic Prime, but also one about the TV and film industry, and what people who make reviews and media analyses can take away and do for these kind of conversations. A lot of the criticisms seen in other videos about Sonic Prime at their core repeat several of the same talking points. Sonic's behavior was so foolish, it was so obvious he shouldn't have trusted Nine. Shadow was the only logical character and was far smarter than him, and Sonic can be a fool who doesn't learn anything. I feel this read takes for granted a few things. Namely, it relies on an overly simplified look at who Nine, really the show's deuteragonist, is. It relies on taking everything Shadow says at face value, even when details in the show directly contradict him. And it misses one of the main narrative techniques Prime relies on: perspective.
Interesting piece. Trashy, pointless, and pretentious.
I think it's about perspective. If you look closely enough, even trash can be recycled into something beautiful.
How about that?
Sonic Prime plays very extensively with limited perspective and knowledge. There are several instances where characters are separated and only one of them has access to knowledge that others don't, or multiple characters react very differently to the same thing. It's not even the first piece of Sonic media to do this. This is a common narrative technique across several Sonic games, including both of the Sonic Adventure games. Like in Adventure 2, it's easy to forget that Shadow has a whole-ass existential crisis in the moments leading up to the final chase, due to learning about the Bio-Lizard and having his memories called into question. None of this is made apparent if you were to play only the hero story, where there are several plot points that don't make sense until you get the context from the dark side. This can be a bit of a challenge in storytelling because it relies on the audience remembering that we, the viewer, have full information the characters in the show don't in the decisions they make. This comes to a head at how Shadow is repeatedly assumed to be the only logical character in Prime, despite the fact that information Sonic and Nine have access to directly contradicts several of Shadow's assumptions, and how Shadow straight up misunderstands several things about Nine. This also comes down to Shadow not understanding the fallout between Sonic and Nine, which Shadow was not there for. He knows that Nine ultimately turns against Sonic. He shows up at the end of the conversation, but was not there for the actual exchange to understand why he did, and continues not to know when they confront him in the grim. And I like Nine. He's a little shit, and basically the one who carried not just Sonic, but this show on his back. I like that he just goes straight for the throat and roasts your fit like it's nothing. He serves as the show's deuteragonist, and his bond with Sonic is the driving force of the conflict. Sonic calls him Tails, but angstier.
I was trained by the misery of life in this foul and heartless city.
Compliment to the hood, 24 hours a day, all my life.
God, I love this kid. So first, Nine was easily one of Sonic's biggest allies and one of the main reasons he had any chance of getting his home back. I will say a lot of the show's enjoyment really does come down to how invested you are in Nine's situation, but I find many reduce him down to just Tails but evil and untrustworthy. Nine is not a twist villain who deceived Sonic and managed to outwit him. Throughout the entire run of the series, it becomes clear that Nine is extremely lonely and desperate for a safe home, where he won't be bullied or hurt again, and he pours all of his hopes and dreams into Sonic, who represents his turn of luck. That's not to say he's an innocent little baby who did nothing wrong, because he certainly did. The Rebels, for instance, rightfully don't trust Sonic and Nine after Nine leaves them behind to run with the Shard. No, Nine is an antagonist in the third season the way Sherry LeBlanc is an antagonist in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. Also, shoutouts to the like 5 people who know about both of these series to understand where I'm going with this. This isn't some twist villain who've been planning a meticulous strategy to manipulate the protagonist and deceive them. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision out of hurt and desperation to sacrifice their current reality in favor of a brighter future, feeling there's no alternative. Both of them jump at the chance to use a newly acquired power to face someone they previously tried teaming up with and made an offer to join up with, now having to sacrifice them instead. The battle with both Nine and Sherry isn't framed as some tyrant's claim for conquest, but instead a self-destructive and self-harming battle. Both of them build a barrier and fight off everyone from the rainbow-colored energy source. Don't say. Seriously, there's some amazing art potential here of Nine using Soulbinding Gate just waiting to happen. This is why throughout Season 3, the framing of most of the fights places emphasis on the toll the Prism takes on Nine to illustrate that it's self-destructive as well, something Sonic points out and aims to stop. Let's look at the critique though, right? A lot of people from what I've seen go with Shadow's perspective, that Sonic should have listened more, looked at what Nine was doing, not trusted him, and focused on getting the shards. But that overlooks why Sonic kept trusting Nine and why Shadow didn't. If Nine was just a power-hungry edgelord who was planning on tricking Sonic the whole time, and should have never been trusted, he never would have gone back to New York and helped the rebels after Sonic said he'd hoped to see him help. He didn't even want to be there. Yes, he sets up a plan and uses it to develop more on the Shadow Drive technology, but he had no reason to risk his life like that in the first place if he wasn't interested in helping Sonic by exploiting his prisoner status throughout Season 2. In the first episode, we established that because of the energy in his body, Sonic can't even run properly, and struggles in one of his earliest fights. It's not until Nine gifts him with the regulators, which also doubles as a moment when Nine is first introduced to the Prism energy and begins experimenting with it, that Sonic is able to move properly and make use of his trademark speed. This entire episode can be followed from Sonic's perspective in adjusting to everything going on and making sense of New York. But you can also look at it from Nine's point of view, which is supported by the visual choices that place emphasis on his reactions to seeing Sonic in action for the first time. He's saying Sonic isn't just talking out his ass. You can see the exact moment he gets attached to him and realizes he's gotten his first friend and a chance at a new life since he made the connection with the shard energy. When it looks like Sonic is about to die here, the look on Nine's face says, "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm never getting something like this again. I can't let this chance pass me by. Sonic can't go." Every single feat Sonic pulls off throughout this series is only possible because Nine helped him. Sonic can only use his speed again properly because he has the regulators. So let's really think through the implications of what Shadow proposes when they fought in Season 2, Episode 1. How exactly was Sonic going to solo the Chaos Council armed with a shard when he barely got to it with the help of 4 other people? Among them was Rusty, who had technical knowledge of the entire facility. What's more, Nine is the one who makes the connection that Sonic is connected to the Prism energy and has the knowledge on how to reassemble them. He's the one who hacks Rusty Rose and saves Sonic. They could only get into the room with the shards because of Nine's technical skills. During the entire fight in Episode 3, Nine only goes out of his way to defend and protect Sonic and nobody else. Whenever Sonic uses any of his Prism powers in other worlds, that's only because of Nine's regulators. When he uses his shoes as a compass to locate shards in other worlds, he can only do that because of Nine's support. Even when Nine left the rebels behind, you can see a moment of hesitation where this isn't something he does casually.
How come you never came to see me, man? Nigga, I don't know you.
Sonic initially can't even touch the shards without getting transported to other worlds. You can guess who gives him the ability to touch them by this point. Meanwhile, Nine also comes back to help and defend the rebels because Sonic persuaded him. It's his fox friend who sabotages comms so Sonic can get the kill off against the Chaos Council when he buys Sonic more time. He pretends to have betrayed Sonic in order to convince them not to kill Sonic. He helps steal the shards from them and relay information to Sonic, builds a communication device so they can keep in touch, and helps reassemble the Prism. This moment where Nine says he needs to be left alone to put the Prism together in many other stories looks like an obvious red flag moment where the traitor is hiding that they're using this to deceive their partner. But it's not here. Nine genuinely worked on the Prism here to ensure that reality would not be harmfully altered in the process. Shadow's stance wasn't that Sonic should talk things out with Nine, it's that he never should have trusted him in the first place and that Nine is inherently untrustworthy from the start. Season 2 Episode 1 lays out where Sonic and Shadow differ in view and how to approach fixing their world. But they don't just arrive at different conclusions because of their differences in personalities. Prime makes it clear that the main driving factor is their difference in what information they have access to. Remember, Shadow never actually saw the moment of the Prism shattering, meaning he never makes the connection until after fighting Sonic that he has the Prism energy himself. That's what allows him to travel between worlds and not the regulators Nine built, as Shadow mistakenly assumes. We properly get a big moment with Shadow and Sonic in Season 2 Episode 1, where Shadow shares his findings with Sonic and the two disagree and end up fighting, because Shadow doesn't trust Sonic to be able to pull off the job and doesn't trust him after breaking reality. and it makes complete sense why they differ too. Shadow has been kept on the outside and away from the action and out of the other Shadowverses. He's only able to access a single world, and because of that was more able to piece together facts that Sonic didn't have access to until the end of the season. Now, Shadow is partially correct here. These are not his real friends, and Sonic is projecting, with particular attention to Nine. He is correct that Sonic can't keep assuming that they're going to think and act like his friends. But that correct point can only go so far in persuading Sonic when Shadow is of the opinion that everyone and everything else is just a fake constructed by the Shard, as evidenced by how he refers to the ghost versions of their friends as just sycophantic wish fulfillment, and the way he talks about the other Shadowverse counterparts. His position was never, you should talk things out with Nine, it's that you never should have trusted Nine or the other Shadowverse counterparts. They don't matter and they're not real. But to do that from Sonic's perspective is to overlook the fact that he only made it as far as he did because of Nine. While yes, Sonic is projecting, he's the only one who really understands and sees Nine's vulnerabilities, since he's the only one Nine ever opened up to. Rather, he's the only one who makes any effort to consider his position, even if he does so harmfully in the process. Why do they show the moment of Sonic creating the energy rift multiple times from different perspectives? They do so to illustrate the hope he unintentionally inspired in the others. Nine sees a new opportunity and sees how he has a once-in-a-lifetime chance in getting his first friend. The rebels see someone willing to overthrow the council. The people of New York all see the dangerous machines with facial identification and weaponry fall when Sonic's energy briefly shuts it down for the first time. They see it's possible for things to change, prompting them to join the rebellion. If Nine really was the kind of traitor Shadow thought he was, he wouldn't have been so genuinely distraught over accidentally helping the Chaos Council build Chaos Sonic. He wouldn't have this moment of immense guilt at being used by them. The first thing he does when he sees Sonic again is apologize about it, and can't even make eye contact with him when he does it. Season 2 also has a flashback showing Nine when he discovers the Grim, and when he experiments more with the Shard energy. We see that he took the time to make a gift for Sonic, and wanted to surprise him with it. He makes note of how much he knows Sonic will love it. Now this isn't an act, and nobody else is around. These are not the actions of a traitor. When they finally get the pieces to assemble the prism, Sonic thanks him, and you can see Nine's body language change up entirely and how happy it made him to hear someone call him a good friend and express his gratitude. It's impressive how the animators really sell what his gratitude means to Nine, and you can see all the joy and excitement pour into him as he perks up from someone appreciating him and thanking him. Even after he turns on Sonic, he's clearly grieving that things didn't work out with him. He sighs deeply, he's frustrated Sonic didn't go along with it, and he's expressing grief and rejection. This isn't something like, I can't believe he fell for that. This is a genuine spur-of-the-moment choice made out of hurt. Nine is not a twist villain in the sense that he didn't plan to turn on Sonic, and was just acting as Shadow thought he did. None of this is meant to be a plot twist. It was an inevitability, the moment their friendship started off on the wrong foot, and was exacerbated by them having to deal with the reality and the crisis. Notably, Shadow is not present for this moment either, and only returns as Nine is leaving, meaning he does not have the context or understanding of why Nine turned on Sonic. His assumption completely misunderstands why Nine is so angry. Shadow assumes it was just a power grab and that Nine is a power-hungry traitor who deceived Sonic. Nine only says exactly when they confront him because it's emotionally easier to deal with, and not something he wants to admit. Nine doesn't wear his heart on his sleeve, he hides his pain and vulnerabilities. This wasn't about power for Nine. We know that from all of his behavior towards Sonic in the episodes prior. This isn't even about whether to restore Green Hill or make the Grim into a new home. More than anything, this is about how Nine felt that Sonic didn't care about him or consider him. That Sonic wasn't concerned about the implications of restoring his home. And that more than anything, the only friendship, affection, and love Nine has ever felt was always meant for someone else. This is why he's speaking as if Sonic betrayed him throughout the conflict, and why Sonic even bothers to attempt trying to get through to him. Of course, Sonic knows that Nine isn't like this, and he tries to reach out, because he was there for the fallout while Shadow wasn't. He's the only one who has any chance of understanding Nine's feelings, because he's the only one Nine let himself be open and vulnerable around. That's also why when we have this moment of nobody gets left behind, we see Sonic looking out to the sky, implying he's thinking about Nine. The two just have a conversation, and that one conversation clearly got through to Nine, and it was clearly affecting him. That assurance that even now I still care about you and think of you as a friend was enough to cut through him. There are a lot of moments that are sold just through Nine's expressions, where he uses his tails to get in your face and make himself look bigger and taller, and he does that when he wants to be in control of the conversation. But when Sonic tells him he cares about his well-being, he kneels down when he says this, as if he's caught on to Nine's habit and adjusted for it to demonstrate his sincerity. Sonic and Nine work really well together. Both of them didn't just envision their ideal world, but thought about all the ways they'd be able to share that world with the other. But they also meet each other at their lowest point and don't know each other as well as they think they do, which ends up hurting them badly. Nine is occupied with getting out of a dystopian city where he's been bullied his whole life, with the first person to show him any kind of friendship. Sonic is being pulled 10 different directions on top of dealing with the guilt of having shattered his home. His hands are trembling here. Both of them are in a bad place and are quick to try and get out of it as quickly as they can. Both of them sort of use each other as a way to deal with that pain, and while they genuinely care a great deal about each other and spend time thinking of all the ways their world would make the other happy, they also both assume the other will just come around and be on the same page. They have a falling out as a result. It's not necessarily because their relationship is inherently toxic. As mentioned, both of them meet each other at their lowest and are hurting badly for different reasons. Them constantly being on the clock contextualizes why they don't just talk things out, particularly in episode 6 where Nine makes his offer to build a home for them both. Sonic's attention this whole time is getting back to New York, because this conversation takes place moments after Nine pulled Sonic out of a fight for the lives of the rebels.
Hey man, fuck y'all! Get your own! When this is over, I'm going home and never looking back. Whether I go it alone is entirely up to you.
I knew you'd come back, buddy! I'll take him low, you take him high.
Already on it.
Despite not really wanting to go back, Nine does and still helps. The way he throws this ultimatum at Sonic comes across to me like he's trying not to make it seem like he cared. But it's hard to make that convincing when you just got done telling that same guy you want to make a paradise world for the two of you. The two of them obviously needed to talk these issues out, but when you map out their interactions, it becomes clear why that wasn't easily possible. The first episode meeting is the only moment they get any breathing room throughout the entire show. After that, they're fighting for their lives while still bonding in episode 3 and get separated at the end. They reunite in episode 6, and in an ideal situation, this would be where Sonic sits down and they talk out what it is that both of them want. But that doesn't happen, because Sonic's priority is understandably the safety of the rebels he knows are fighting for their lives. After this, Nine Yagami out here does his plan of intentionally getting imprisoned and having the payoff of deceiving his enemy 8 episodes later. During this time, he manages to communicate with Sonic via the regulator he gave him and upgraded it. But because he's a prisoner under surveillance, they have very limited conversations. Both Light and Nine also both like making evil funny faces, except Nine actually cares about Sonic. During this time, Sonic rushes in to rescue him. They even share a hug, even if Nine isn't loving it and Nine apologizes to him. They're together for the rest of the season, but they spend that entire time under constant attack, or they're dealing with the crisis of reality being destroyed around them because of the Chaos Council. If Nine had been there to see Sonic fight Shadow and assert that Nine is real and that he refuses to let others not acknowledge him as an equal, he never would have turned. If he had seen the way Sonic repeatedly verbalized Nine's safety and wanting to rescue him even before mentioning the shards, then this falling out wouldn't have happened. When Nine contacts Sonic with a plan to bring down Chaos Sonic, who Devin Matt clearly was having a lot of fun voicing, Sonic hesitates to go through with it, not because he doesn't trust him, but because he's concerned about bringing the threat closer to Nine and endangering him too. Sonic even explicitly tells others that he knows Nine is rough around the edges. Sonic knows these things and knows that Nine isn't a harmless baby. But he also knows why Nine is so jaded and mistrusting, and knows that he needs a different life to change it. He knows that Nine is capable of being persuaded because he already did it at the Grim. Nine flat out insults Sonic multiple times. He's very blunt and not emotionally understanding of him either. He's very guarded and mistrusted, and Sonic doesn't ignore any of that. He's fully aware of it and brings that up when the rebels write him off because Sonic understands exactly why Nine acts that way. But he also knows that Nine has a great deal of capacity to be loyal and considerate because he came through for him in stopping Chaos Sonic. This entire segment of getting back to New York and finding Chaos Sonic isn't just about getting the shards back, it's about conveying Nine's sincerity to the viewer. He's dealing with a version of Tails who never had any of the opportunities in life he deserved and aims to try and give that to him. It's also funny that in episode 1, when Tails warns Sonic about there being a trap, he doesn't really get bothered until Eggman starts talking shit about Tails and riles Sonic up, because Nine ends up falling for the exact same trick later. The Chaos Council is questioning him for a way to defeat Sonic. Insulting and threatening him didn't do anything, even if you can see he's clearly hurt a bit by having his insecurities thrown in his face. But all they had to do was get him start talking about Sonic and hyping him up. In fact, the biggest flaw in Nine's prisoner strategy is trying to convince the others that he doesn't care about Sonic. As incompetent as the Chaos Council is, not once do they buy his act that he doesn't think anything about Sonic. They have an entire conversation where they point out how much he admires him. Trying to hurt Sonic is what causes Nine's plan to fall apart at the seams and what led to him being used by the Council. From the first episode, they showcase how and why Sonic makes the mistake he does, and assuming Nine is just Tails who lost his memory, before discovering the other worlds. This 1992 password scene isn't just a Sonic 2 reference, it's there to illustrate that Nine and Tails are still closely connected. They share a lot of history in common, and it contextualizes why that line feels so blurred for Sonic. When they first meet, it's a very nice scene, but it's also kind of sad when you know that it was a mistake, with no one at fault, but it led to them starting off on the wrong foot, and it's what leads to the Season 2 finale. Just as Sonic projects Tails onto Nine, Nine is also projecting onto Sonic, since he represents his lone ticket to the new life he craves, and he doesn't fully grasp why Sonic wouldn't want to abandon his own life. But it's also not a betrayal of him either. This scene would honestly retroactively become very violating from Nine's perspective, because he got so worked up, so emotionally lifted by it, and has been so emotionally reliant on Sonic's care, that it stings so much more deeply that all the love Sonic has given is seemingly reserved for someone else entirely, and Nine is left all alone. Sonic recognizes that Nine isn't going to be a sweet, bubbly person because he's endured so much abuse and cruel beatings entirely alone, and is willing to be patient with him knowing that Nine needs a safe home if he's ever going to get better. He has good reason to see the better, kinder sides of Nine because Nine hides his vulnerabilities and true feelings for people, a privilege that he's only extended to Sonic. That's not to say others are unreasonable in their assessment of Nine, particularly the rebels who are on the receiving end of him leaving them behind. Under any other circumstances, they'd be able to talk out these feelings and Sonic would be able to assure Nine how much he cares about him, and specifically cares about him as a separate being from Tails. I would say Sonic definitely cares about Nine more than he does the other Shadowverse counterparts. But the two of them are under constant attack and on a clock nearly the entire run of the series, in a way that prevents them from having these necessary conversations and making their friendship work. It's tragic that they weren't awarded the time and proper conversations and communications to work things out. It's this circumstance that leaves Sonic confused. They both cared about each other so much, but it still played out the way it did. And Shadow doesn't pick up on that because he wasn't there for their fallout, or for any of these prior scenes that shows why Sonic acted the way he did and trusted Nine so much. At the end of Season 2, when Shadow says, "I don't think he wants the same thing as us," he's right. But Sonic brings up a reasonable point in this context. How many other people do we have with Prism knowledge who can properly assemble the Prism for us while we're on a clock? Both are right, and it's further supported by the way all three of them react differently to the Ghost Hill crew. Sonic, understandably, is hurt and upset by seeing them like this, knowing that he caused it, and later sighs with happiness when he sees they have all the shards because he knows there's a way to save them. Shadow dismisses them entirely as wish fulfillment and wrongfully assumes that they're fakes, which they are not. Nine only reacts to the ghost version of Tails right after explaining his theory that Ghost Hill is trapped in a progress state and is incomplete and reacts to seeing Tails. It makes sense he'd see Tails and dismissively say they're nothing alike. If anything, his sneering here has a degree of envy to it. Imagine learning there's a whole multiverse out there, and every version of you gets to be loved and have friends while you don't. Imagine seeing a version of yourself looking happy, carefree, and surrounded by people who care about you, which is part of the subtext behind it. They get to have all the connections you've never gotten to experience in life. This is also why they show these brief moments of Nine seeing Sails and Mangy and putting emphasis on his reaction to them. It's what plants the idea for Nine that, from his perspective, it looks like Sonic never cared about him in the first place, and that Sonic has only been projecting his old friends onto those who look like them. He's hurt by assuming that the only friendship he's ever felt was always meant for someone else. Shadow is the one projecting the least here specifically because he's been kept outside the conflict and only near the Prism blueprint. But the trade-off is also that he has the least knowledge of everyone about the conflicting wants from everyone. He can see Nine has different thoughts in mind, but also wrongfully assumes he's just inherently untrustworthy. He wrongfully assumes that the regulators are what let Sonic travel between worlds. There's a scene I see criticized a lot in Season 3, Episode 1, where Sonic and Shadow are escaping the decaying Ghost Hill and Sonic wants to stop and save his friends, to which Shadow tells him they're just fakes and to keep it moving. For a lot of people, I think they just took what Shadow said at face value, which makes Sonic come across as needlessly sentimental and foolish. However, Shadow isn't really accurate if we go by an earlier scene I don't see talked about in Season 2, Episode 8.
It's home.
The forest is the most beautiful. Ugh. What's happening?
Amy, Knuckles, Tails, guys!
The forest is the most beautiful place on Earth.
As long as I'm around, you'll.
They're all ghostly again.
The forest is the most beautiful
Everything was
place
back,
on Earth.
just for a second.
I don't need the details.
This is gonna work!
Tell me what to snack.
Notably, Sonic is the only one here for this scene. Shadow and Nine don't see this. Perspective, right? But you'll notice that Sonic isn't hurt or bothered by this moment. If anything, he's more pumped and excited than ever, saying this is gonna work. In fact, the first thing he does is contact Nine to tell him what he saw, because he shares the info he has with him regularly. This information is important because it confirms three things for Sonic. One, obviously that they can restore Green Hill by fixing the prism. Two, it confirms that these are indeed his real friends, which is also why it's so hard for him to leave them behind one episode later and why Shadow isn't correct here. Three, it confirms that the plan Sonic had in mind is doable if he can confirm that nothing happened to Nine, which is also why he called him right after seeing this. He also explains what he saw a second time in a later scene. Now, Nine can't really concentrate on it because he's under time pressure to fix the prism and deal with reality falling apart. Because Sonic saw this moment and nothing happened to Nine, he knows that his friends in Green Hill can coexist with the Shadowverse counterparts, meaning his plan to share his home with Nine is within reach too. Sonic's thinking is that he doesn't want to just give Nine one friend, but to have him completely surrounded by people who would love him, and specifically wants him to meet Tails. And perspective is key. This is the main reason Sonic and Shadow briefly disagree in Season 3, Episode 1. These presumably aren't fakes like Shadow assumed because he doesn't have this information. One of the biggest challenges in writing plots like this is that the viewer usually has all the information individual characters don't have. So when characters react the way they do, the story has to consider if the audience has kept tally on what individual characters do or don't know. As a result, I find a lot of people take issue with Sonic's actions because they immediately trust Shadow's word, despite the fact that several scenes directly undermine what Shadow is saying, because he doesn't know what's going on either. This isn't a case of Shadow being Sonic's guide. This is a case of both Sonic and Shadow having an imbalance of information, and both of them having to make assumptions about the world and a solution to their problem without all the knowledge possible. Mystery stories play with perspective and limited knowledge all the time, like when a character makes a slip of the tongue and says something they shouldn't know if they're innocent. But these are intentionally designed to be puzzles. I think pushing more of those details front and center would have been beneficial for Prime's story. In short, these are not fakes like Shadow incorrectly assumed. These are their actual friends, and Sonic has to leave them behind, not knowing if it's even possible to save them at this point. That's also what makes it so significant that after this scene, Shadow tells Sonic he needs to fight for the friends that are still here, signifying he at least acknowledges them as real now in contrast to seeing them as obstacles prior. I do think that Prime definitely could have utilized Shadow more while still maintaining the limited knowledge idea. But that's easier said than done when considering the mandates surrounding Shadow. More on that in a bit. I've seen people make the comparison to how Sonic reacts in the storybook games, which also have versions of his friends as characters in the story, citing that Sonic didn't just project onto them the same way. But I think an important difference between Prime and these stories is that Sonic always has a guide with intimate knowledge of how the world he's in works. When he doesn't, he has Tails as his partner. Prime Sonic does not have that benefit. As much as we talk about how much Tails looks up to his best friend and how much confidence he gives him, it's important to remember that it's a two-way street. Sonic thinks the world of him, he admires and respects him, and relies a great deal on him for coming up with plans, which is exactly what happens here, with the main difference being the limited knowledge he has. When the two have their falling out, Nine even raises the question of, did you think about what would happen if you restore your home? Assuming that Sonic didn't even think about it. But he did. He even saw proof. What hurts Nine and sends him over the edge is the real Tails line. Poor choice of words. I feel that a lot of people overlook the rift between the two in looking at Nine's character, and instead just reduce him to Tails but evil, which is also why they assume that Sonic was a fool to ever trust him and get annoyed with Sonic as a result. Nine didn't need to be killed or destroyed. He needed to be stopped. Not just for everyone else's sake and for their homes, but for Nine's safety too. This wasn't some tyrant who deceived Sonic and made his grand move for conquest. This was a self-destructive breakdown Sonic was doing his best to intervene on. He tries to get through to Nine and talk him down because he cares about Nine, even if nobody else will, and even if nobody else thinks he deserves it. This is the same Sonic who only lost the other shards because he chose not to see the others as fakes or less than, as projections of the prisms to be sacrificed, and Nine is no exception.
Don't worry, they're just getting the plot out of the way so it won't slow down the pew, pew, pew.
I don't have a problem with people criticizing Prime. I actually agree with several of the points made and have many of them here in this section. My problem is how in many of the reviews and reactions surrounding it, they were mostly attributed to either laziness, lack of skill from the creative team, or the author ran out of ideas. None of this is helpful, especially placing this around Prime's production. Prime's action scenes can feel very limited. I find people praise the animation and reduce that to fight scenes, and there's certainly some impressive animation. It's honestly amazing how much consideration goes into the animation choices and how that serves the story. When I say the animation is good, I'm referring to how expressive everyone is, and how in so many scenes, there's a lot of thought and consideration into how characters react. Sonic's hands trembling at the realization of what he's done. There's the little scenes where Nine, after having turned against Sonic, still has these moments of genuine shock each time he escalates more bit by bit, or Nine covering up his feelings after getting hurt. There's a scene in the first episode where Sonic just compliments Nine, and you can see he's not even sure of how to react before calming back down. It's probably the first time someone has ever complimented him at all, let alone a major source of his being an outcast. Even a lot of design choices, like the fact that Nine has noticeably thinner tails compared to his other Shadowverse counterparts, ends up conveying a lot about the characters indirectly. When Renegade joins Sonic to fight Nine, you'll notice that when he charges after him, Sonic has this worried expression that changes to hesitation before going to join in the fight. He knows that he has to stop Nine, but he also knows that he's the only one who has any shot of understanding Nine's actual feelings, and not the image he's putting out to everyone. The others are out to kill Nine, while he still wants to stop him, and knows that they still need him to fix things. It comes up again when Sonic is very clearly pained to see Nine collapsing, even if it's advantageous to them. The way that the shot emphasizes the look of genuine panic Nine has when he's on the defensive. Also, this show really loves playing a lot with characters using their ears. That's adorable. There's a lot of very creative uses of lighting, and a lot of the shots, especially in the first season, are incredible. There's this moment here of the train passing by as Sonic and Nine first meet, and Nine is really trying to bury his feelings and convince himself he doesn't need anyone, but wants so badly to know about how things could be different in his life that he doesn't even know about. It doesn't have to say anything about his internal fight here because you see it on his face. There's a lot of the Boss Cage maze with the darker lighting, the general vibe of New Yoke, this flashback shot of Tails piloting through the clouds, this shot of Eggman's face through the prism, all in Season 1 that all stand out. They exist alongside this shot of the electrocution happening here, or Sonic's superform after Eggman summons the ultimate power of trans rights. It's not a coincidence either, and it comes back to the big three: budgets, deadlines, and mandates. There are several points where you can tell they didn't have the most time in the world to give things proper detail or time, and budget constraints don't allow for it. These become a point of discussion of where people focus their priority, and I think Sonic Prime visually shows it concerns itself with its cast and their expressions, because those are the things most effective at communicating the story. Where I feel Prime struggles is actually in most of its fight scenes. The challenge comes less from the animation and more from character design and set piece limitations.
Sega actually sent us the game character models, and we imported those into our pipeline, and then we innovated on the texturing and the surfacing of the characters themselves. We came up with this kind of graphic texture treatment, a little more simplified than the realistic quills would be for Sonic and his friends. And that allowed us to bring in both like an appealing cartoony aspect, but a light realism in terms of like lighting and mood and tone.
No reasonable production circumstances. Fox only. Final destination. Because the multiverse plot is done in part to save on development time and being able to reuse major parts of character models, it's essentially Knuckles with different outfits on, or have voice actors voice several characters.
So, one of the things that was so important to us and to Sega about Sonic Prime was that it brought Sonic back to his action-forward roots. So it was something that we really wanted to push.
It shows when a lot of limitations come down to limited variety in what they have the time and budget to actualize. There's not much from a choreography standpoint you can really use to differentiate, say, Rebel Rouge from Baton and from Prim. They're all functionally the same character, which is the point. but it means that you're very limited in trying to make this an action-driven series with a ton of fight scenes when pretty much all of the characters largely move and fight the same. Who they end up fighting against ends up being a problem too. Sonic can only be self-aware about being annoyed at fighting that baby for the millionth time so many times before it starts to run thin. Because it's not visually distinct enough to differentiate itself from previous versions of the fight, it makes them feel very samey. As a result, a lot of the best fight scenes pick up a lot more when they introduce new set pieces, which they can really only do once per season because of the big three: budgets, deadlines, and mandates. Think Chaos Sonic and the Big Robot, for example. A lot of memorable action scenes center around visual variety in a location that lends itself to creative movements from the characters, like a precarious height leading them to adapting. That, or they have distinct weapons or superpowers that create variety. That, or the fight itself advances the story as a narrative decision, as it's more of a conversation than a fight. Just looking at things like how the character fights, what powers they have, how they behave during the fight all communicates details about who they are. Even comparing things show to show doesn't work well because they're projects made with very different budgets and with very different staffing, especially comparing films to TV shows. Sonic gets a unique power in each Shadowverse he goes in, which is a great idea. But they're very limited in what kind of variety they bring to the table, considering he doesn't get any abilities in Ghost Hill, New Yoke, or No Place that actually give him some unique combat abilities or visually distinct fight sequences for the area. Walking on water essentially turns the space he's in into blue ground, meaning he's basically doing the same fight scenes he was before. Boss Cage gives him claws, which are a fun change of pace, but the whole point of his time in Boss Cage is him spending most of the episodes there relying on diplomacy, meaning he doesn't rely on them much. The Grim gives him by far the most visually interesting and differentiating power, and it's one of the better parts of the dreaded drawn-out fight sequence in Season 3. But it only shows up at the 11th hour, so we don't get that much time with it. Even in Season 3, you can tell there was an effort to introduce some kind of major fight set piece in each episode, the first being the Grimbots, then Big, then the introduction of Sonic's Shadowverse power. But what sticks out in most people's minds is the repetition of the Grim robots because they get duplicated so much, and duplicated into functionally more of the same versions of the exact people they're fighting since the start of the show. If you look at any fight scene in Isolation and Prime without any of the surrounding context of the episode as a whole, they're pretty much fine. They look nice, they do the job, and some of them are even pretty fun to really good. I think some standouts are Sonic vs. Shadow as well as the New Yoke fight where Nine's ear twitches, he takes out the robot and doesn't even bother looking while still hacking. It has a lot of creativity behind it. But when you have the surrounding context, a lot of the later fight scenes just feel like a game of Prism Piece Hot Potato, with nothing really advancing the story or visually interesting enough to keep it going. After a while, I just found I wanted it to be over because the moments between these fight scenes are by far the most interesting. This happens a lot in Season 3. There's honestly a lot of nice moments in it, but its best parts by far are its quieter moments when the characters aren't fighting. Rusty declaring her autonomy and feeling almost sorry for the other robots who have no sense of agency? Chef's kiss. The Rose sisters declaring each other sisters? Awesome. It's especially good when it's Sonic and Nine. Their conversation before the big fight and after the big fight are easily the best parts of Season 3. It has the effect of get back to the good part when you see Nine duplicate the same robots for the 80th time. It's not as if the characters develop or build on their skill sets over time or grow their abilities to introduce more variety. Sonic teaches the others to spin dash, but they use it so sparingly after this point you'd be forgiven for forgetting that they even did this. Do you think Sonic just collected all of the Tailses and just throws them around to people like Hot Shots Part 2? God, that movie has so many problems. Can't escape that propaganda racism. The settings the fight scenes take place in largely don't lend themselves to a great deal of variety. And the limited budget and time frame means that they basically reuse the same opponent, but like make them bigger or change their color, which doesn't really alter much in terms of stakes or suspense. It's not as cut and dry to necessarily say to trim fight scenes in favor of dialogue, when you consider how much thought goes into making as many of the scenes as expressive as possible from a visual standpoint. It's not a surprise that this show won an award for its animation. While Nine ends up stealing the show, he ends up making a lot of the cast feel pretty superfluous. I actually like the Boss Cage section because of what it tells us indirectly about Sonic's relationship with Amy. Prime isn't just asking us who are Sonic's friends, it asks us why does he care about them. For instance, the Boss Cage Maze episode creates a simple situation. Sonic is in a position where he doesn't have Tails or Nine to rely on, like he usually does, and this world's counterpart of them really can't help either. It puts him in a situation where he has to solve this dilemma without the help he almost always has. He's more than fine fighting a monster when he's told about it to find the shard and to solve their hunger issue, but then tries diplomacy instead upon learning its Thorn Rose. The entire section indirectly shows us not just who Amy is, but why Sonic cares about her and respects her. He's put in a situation where he has to use skills he's seen her use, but by his own admission, he's not good at. He comes to appreciate her strengths more knowing how easy she makes it look. The situation itself is simple. The point isn't just about the conflict itself, but what Sonic takes away from it in trying to resolve it. But other areas like No Place can feel very underutilized, like what if the Sonic characters were pirates, and we don't really get much if anything beyond that. If not that, then several characters have what should be pretty major things about them that don't get room to breathe, like Rusty Rose being forcibly roboticized. Poor Sails. This show is pretty fun to look at from his point of view because Sonic just pops in and out with all these weird people attacking them. Then he meets another version of himself and waves to him like, huh, he seemed nice. Wonder why he looked like me. Then a few minutes later, everything is going to shit, and next thing you know, he's acting like a god and trying to kill you. Then you're in a war. In general, I think just having a bit of room to breathe and really sit with these differing perspectives would have gone a long way. Also, this show will really make you hate babies. A lot. If you've never watched this, it'll sound like some weird edgelord thing to say, but if you know, you know. Even multiple people who worked on the show seem to hate the baby, which says a lot. Next up, the ending. Man, oh man, did you get done dirty, Nine. It's no secret that even with people who like Prime, it's often that Nine is such a fun and interesting character that he carries a lot of the experience for people. That shouldn't come as a surprise considering he's the protagonist of the show. The entire conflict of the show ultimately comes down to Sonic and his relationship with his friend group, and is especially shown in his friendship with Nine. It shows us how he not only treats Nine himself, but also what he takes away from it and how he treats his other friends, particularly Tails. Sonic talks to and about his friends to Nine with a newfound appreciation for why he likes them. It's just as much a story from Nine's perspective. This very jaded, desperate kid comes to feel Sonic didn't care about him. We the viewer know Sonic does, arguably more than any other Shadowverse counterpart. But as mentioned, the show goes to great lengths with the use of limited perspective to show why Nine felt Sonic didn't care or think about the implications of restoring Green Hill when Sonic not only had considered that, he wanted to share his home with Nine. All of that makes it feel all the more abrupt when we essentially reset back to the start with no real resolution as to what happened to the others. The main driver behind this is, you guessed it, the big three: budgets, deadlines, and mandates. We're left with a lot of questions and unresolved feelings that makes it almost feel like there's an episode or two missing. First of all, is Nine even okay? The prism is gone. So did the Grim also restore to something different? Why did it have no inhabitants in the first place? The entire conflict was set into motion because of Nine being isolated. He and Sonic don't see eye to eye on things because Nine has never been in a position of having others show him genuine kindness or friendship. Sonic even seems to realize this, and a major benefit of Nine living in Green Hill with Sonic would provide is he gets a whole circle of friends to care about him, not just one. It's hard not to watch the end of the series feeling, what about Nine, because we only get a resolution for Sonic and his situation. Even if you can't provide an epilogue or a resolution for everyone, it feels very hollow and unfinished by not extending this to Nine of all people, considering the major role he plays. The two of them collectively define the story's conflict. While he and Sonic reconcile, and this shot of Nine voluntarily hugging Sonic is the best thing ever, it means that we're just left with a lot of unfinished business with the two of them. I love this shot of Sonic grinning to Nine like he didn't just sacrifice himself and like they weren't just fighting to the death a minute ago. And Nine even recognizes this. He realizes what a huge mistake he made and how wrong he was in his judgment, seeing someone who cares enough to protect him and still care about his well-being even when nobody else does. It's not even a debate for Sonic. And you can tell how Nine is overcome with a lot of guilt and shame for all the kindness he feels he doesn't deserve, this seemingly undue compassion. In the end, he did not apologize to everyone. He said, "I'm sorry, Sonic." That apology was directed to him. When Sonic makes his demands at the end, his voice actor, Devin Mack, does a great job at how he puts this bass in his voice and demanding the others not go after Nine, only to go much gentler and softer when he tells Nine to do the same thing to them. These individual moments are great, but collectively feels rushed and unfinished. Nine being left alone and arguably worse off now that he's made a bunch of enemies doesn't really give for a great or interesting resolution, and we're only left with the thoughts and feelings of wanting things to keep going. That's really what Sonic Prime tries to explore through the Shadowverse. Prime doesn't just give us multiverse versions of Sonic's friends, it interrogates why Sonic cares so much about his inner circle. And the whole Shadow was the only one who made sense, Sonic should have never trusted Nine, overlooks the fact that Nine can be reasoned with, he listens to Sonic, he can be persuaded. Sonic's unending compassion ends up betraying all of Nine's pessimistic expectations about how others act. He's never had someone who unintentionally hurt him, but still genuinely cares for him enough to make it right. One thing Sonic does, as we see through Nine, is continually surpass and defy his expectations. How can someone be so strong and kind to him and still protect him with all seemingly no reason to care? It's why he's so impressed by his abilities at the start, and why everyone around Nine can see just how much he admires Sonic even when he tries hiding it. A stronger ending could look like Sonic still offering him the home in Green Hill. Because when you think about it, the issue here was less about the Grim versus Green Hill, and more Nine's feelings that Sonic was just projecting someone else onto him and really didn't care about him or see him as real, which is why after everything that went down he sees Sonic wasn't lying. This could look like Sonic offering that and Nine deciding to take accountability for the damage he caused. Maybe we establish that they can still visit other worlds. There's the far more interesting point of how Tails and Nine would interact with each other, because there'd likely be envy and animosity Nine might feel, while Tails would likely be understanding. Imagine an ending where Sonic and Nine sit down together and actually have a proper conversation about their wants. He gives Nine the conversation he couldn't have had earlier. I don't think it's a coincidence that so much fan content of Nine explores these ideas, where he's some mixture of wanting to kill Tails and being envious of him, but also gradually growing to like the others and pushing himself out of his comfort zone because he trusted Sonic enough. The idea of Nine half wanting to kill Tails and genuinely befriending him is also really funny, I'll be honest. The idea of Sonic just collecting Tailses is also funny too, and Tails having a chaotic twin brother who can match him intellectually would be funny. Nine underestimating Tails thinking he's a soft little baby only to see he's just as chaotic, if not more than he is, pretty much writes itself. But left as is, the ending just feels very unfinished. One thing, as many have said, is to trim down fight scenes to give a more proper resolution. But as I've said several times, and we're going to get more into it now, budgets, deadlines, mandates. I've mentioned several times that I'm not here to convince you that Sonic Prime is some amazing, brilliant show. It feels more unfinished and incomplete, rushed. I enjoyed it, and it's no secret that Sonic and Nine being these tragic, doomed-to-fail besties was a favorite of mine. My issue lies not in the critique itself, but more in the continued lack of care in both framing the conversation and in looking at the root causes behind what went wrong. Too often these issues get attributed to just laziness or lack of caring. How often do we hear the writers just ran out of ideas and filled with time with something? I find the reviews and coverage of Sonic Prime especially telling when you consider the surrounding context of what the film and TV industry looked like when Season 3 was released, and how it still looks now. At the time, we were seeing some of the largest pushes for film and TV strikes, people in the industry bringing up very real grievances that have been fought for time and time again: employment security, pay equality, improved working conditions. Sonic Prime can't really be talked about without discussing the time frame it would have been produced under, accounting not only for the pandemic, but the strikes that arose in the film and TV industry. You can trace nearly every issue listed here, and most of the criticisms people have, back to many of these circumstances. Wildbrain, who worked on Sonic Prime, unionized in 2023. At the very least, they made a public post about it around August of 2023. Not only that, but we also have to consider the circumstances of Sega of America's layoffs after their own unionization efforts. While Sega denied this, it's hard to see as anything other than blatant union busting. The union efforts include an annual bonus plan, insurance, retirement, and parental benefits. It also requires Sega to provide a worker-led committee prior notice for policy changes, including for AI usage. On top of that, when Sonic Prime aired its third season in 2024, it came not long after the cusp of SAG-AFTRA strikes, which weren't even the only strikes going on related to film, TV, and also the game industry. It's a very striking image seeing people out protesting and boycotting for better working conditions versus the discourse of media they made not bringing up these circumstances and people asking what went wrong. In Canada in particular, people in the industry talk about the working conditions that necessitate securing protections for employment. This can include pay disparities, insecure contracts, and adequate time off and retirement support. Canada's film and TV industry is also very directly affected by the exploitation that drives people to need to strike and boycott in the US, because so much of their workflow is reliant on star power and administrative consultation from people in the US. 118 days of striking, and it unfortunately still didn't even fully address all the problems on the table. We're going to keep seeing these problems persist. That's not to minimize what the efforts did accomplish, but to point out that these problems have historically ebbed and flowed because the root issues of exploitation still exist. Look no further than Disney, who had a major labor strike in the 1940s. You see, a few years before, Disney constructed a new building in 1937 for their Burbank office, but found themselves about $4.5 million in debt due to Pinocchio and Fantasia being box office failures, as well as the European market affected by the war at the time. The film Dumbo was largely made during a strike and completed with animators who crossed the picket line. Disney would lay off over 200 strikers after the strike ended. Workers were also forced to sign documents claiming they only worked 40 hours a week, when they in fact worked much more. And cartoonists wanted professional screen credits for their art, as they claimed Disney often took credit for their work. Snow White made the highest box office gross at the time of over $10 million, but they didn't compensate the artist despite the publicized bonuses brought up. Then Walt Disney held a meeting condescendingly expressing that his workers had it good, that they had training and paid time off. He needed them to increase output but couldn't increase wages and said, "Grunch." If you want more info on this, I suggest checking out The Disney Revolt, the Great Labor War of Animation's Golden Age. It's a good read. Flash forward to 1988, and even later in 2007, and we see a similar issue in the 2007 writer's strike, acting for similar rights, protections, and benefits. In the case of the latter, in 2007, the boom of reality TV played a major factor in the necessity of striking. You can look at the output and quality of media that came out around this time, because it's nearly impossible to talk about or review without putting in context the working conditions and labor situation at the time that played a large deal in influencing that outcome. That's not to say don't criticize anything ever, but instead to incorporate these circumstances into your reviews and approach review with that degree of empathy. We can move past lazy. I really like Squid Game, but it's beyond messed up knowing that the creator was still done dirty and was stressed to the point of losing several of his teeth in making it. Really sit with that. The guy who wrote the anti-capitalist hit show lost his teeth from stress and also got screwed over by the network. That's barely scratching the surface of a lot of the casting issues that surround Squid Game. Another consideration is ChatGPT and generative AI as a whole. ChatGPT launched an early demo in 2022. Even if it's not used, the way it's been on the eyes of industry heads in film, TV, and gaming should be cause for alarm, given the way they would use it to functionally outsource labor. And we've seen the way AI has wormed its way into numerous apps and workplaces now. This isn't even getting into the exploitative nature of AI tied to exploited African labor, like the case with OpenAI paying not even $2 for making ChatGPT functional, or the environmental damage it causes as we see more and more effects from climate change. We're seeing further advocacy protecting against AI for better worker rights, and because of the threat of outsourcing. Jeffrey Katzenberg, co-founder of DreamWorks and former chairman of Walt Disney Studios, speculated and predicted generative AI affecting as much as 90% of animation jobs. But the issue isn't in how it looks or the belief that AI would truly be on the level of professional artists, but that it will sell and generate revenue with less financial cost. I also find that some conversations discuss AI not from a position of empathy for the people it harms, but instead the idea that it makes subpar entertainment slop and is responsible for lazy writing, which I feel seriously misses the problem and isn't centering the right issues. We also have to consider the influence the pandemic and the public health policies surrounding it in both the US and Canada have had in the space of animation. Let's tie it back to Sonic Prime and map out the show's lifespan with that of the progress of the pandemic policies. Sonic Prime's first, second, and third seasons aired in 2022, 23, and 24, which would have placed the production timelines from around 2020 to 21, 22, and 23, give or take. Now, the pandemic was declared an international crisis by the World Health Organization in 2020 and declared over in Canada around 23, placing it during Prime's first and third season of production in all likelihood. This is also a similar timeline to the pandemic response by the US government, which is to say that all of those deaths and disabilities, all the illnesses and responses from businesses who were given the clear to have hordes of people returned to on-site were all placed around the time frame from Season 2, i.e. during Season 3 production timeline. Now, animation at the time was largely one of the major industries carrying film and TV during a lot of the stay-home protections that were pretty measly to begin with. But with this in mind, the circumstances also line up with how the film and TV industry responded to the pandemic, relying heavily on animation initially and then saying, alright, back to normal, fuck y'all, once they got the clear, once the governments declared the pandemic that isn't actually over. Now, there's an entire issue about the eradication of public health and the way pandemics are still ongoing, and how both the US and Canadian government have done a major push for MAID and eugenics, but it's not the scope of this video. A later one though. This isn't to imply that animation was by any means safe during this time, or still okay as an industry, but it speaks to the production circumstances Prime would have been under in the first 2 seasons as opposed to the third. Not only did it have these factors, but this was also during a major purge during Netflix's production. Netflix has a major model around growth and not necessarily trying to prioritize the well-being of the production staff or anything beyond growth. This purge saw the cancellation of a ton of shows and films on Netflix. Now, honestly, I take issue with several parts of this article's framing, but it does do a good job at detailing a lot of Netflix's business history. I would argue against some of the conclusions it draws, but see for yourself if my word doesn't satisfy. As for how it relates to Prime, if I had to speculate, I imagine it would have gotten less funding for Season 3, considering when development for it would have had to take place. From a project management standpoint, this would also be the biggest deciding factor in terms of a production timeline, because effort in your staff, their salaries and benefits, are what go to the bulk of budgets for projects. You gotta pay people after all. But let's just be more direct. We do have word from one of the animators who worked on Sonic Prime that tight deadlines were one of the biggest challenges. Those challenges also mean a lot in the context of knowing that some of the people who worked on Prime also apparently worked on Across the Spider-Verse, aka the same film that had unsustainable working conditions via crunch and led to a bunch of animators quitting. 11-hour workdays, 7 days a week for over a year to meet the deadline. Joey Pogoy, who won an animation award for Sonic Prime, puts a particular focus on health and well-being in the news coverage surrounding his award. And it doesn't surprise me that this is the conversation being had. If anything, it says a lot that even in this very news story, one of his friends mentions that he works through being sick while also having this conversation. One of the most common critiques of Prime is the way Shadow is largely just out of the picture. I even feel it too. But doing so also needs to be put in perspective with the why, instead of attributing it to just the writers didn't have any ideas. In one interview, producer Logan McPherson notes that they were held to several strict mandates regarding what they can and can't do with Shadow, a pattern you'll notice across several pieces of Sonic media. Let's pair that with the issue of deadlines. You have a show with Shadow as one of the main characters. They likely mandated that Shadow be in it because the final season would air the same year the Sonic film starring Shadow would be around in too. We also have a Shadow video game coming out, and Sega and all of the other joining companies want to keep that hype train building up. I think Prime definitely would have been better if Shadow had more of a role in it. But it also makes sense why, if you're on tight deadlines, you don't want to bother risking having your interpretation and portrayal rejected and get set back rewriting large portions of your script and causing a backlog in the entire production process. It's safer to just stick to the mandates and keep him on the outside where any adjustments have less of an effect on the story. Does that mean that it can't be criticized? Of course not. But how many reviews have I seen now in prep for this that attribute Shadow's portrayal to just laziness or couldn't think of anything to do with him? Like, if you want a buddy duo plot with Shadow, that's understandable. But media, and especially animation review spaces, are heavily limited by not engaging with these things. Blame the budgets, blame the companies, but don't call animators and writers lazy. I don't watch Sonic Prime, see its worst moments, and think, wow, these guys were so lazy, do they even care about what they're doing? I think, man, this had so much more potential. This industry is not equitable to the people in it at all. Sonic Prime isn't amazing. It's not. I enjoyed it. I'd love for it to give 9 a proper ending where Sonic finally gave him the better life he always deserved. I'd love for an angsty story where 9 can't help but envy and resent Tails, but also come to slowly befriend him too. I'd love for them to be chaotic twin brothers who low-key try to kill each other. I love this show from an animation standpoint because it's great watching all the thoughtful little details and expressions, and it's an unbelievable achievement from a cinematography perspective. I love Sonic dearly, but there's not a single piece of official Sonic media I can point to and say this is peak, because it's the idea of him and construction behind it I like more than anything. That's honestly why it thrives. The reason I chose to make this is still to say to speak from a place of empathy. You can critique with empathy. But it's also kind of funny just hearing all the conversations about Sonic's true character like he hasn't been interpreted in a million different ways over the years. People like the idea of Sonic more than he's actually portrayed in any of the official media he exists in. And that's fine, but put it in perspective is all. At the end of the day, Sonic always is and always will be a molded brand. And keep in mind, I think unions conceptually are pretty milquetoast in how far they go for advocacy. It's banding together at the end of the day, and they still exclude a lot of people and is reliant on someone being employed, which still doesn't fully address the material conditions people are living under. Still not a bad idea to keep an eye on the movement though. That's not even getting into the fact that unionization efforts are further complicated by things like non-disclosure agreements, or the fact that these businesses will basically continue the cycle of treating workers like shit. It's not laziness or lack of ideas in this industry that lead to less than amazing work. Literally, it comes down to business decisions and comes back to budgets, deadlines, and mandates. Prime was pretty much what I expected. 9 basically carried, but he deserved better. He gets a safe home and made it up to the others with Sonic's help. It's canon because I said so. It's not lost on me that there was an announcement in late 2024 that WildBrain is working with Paramount to air Sonic Prime on Nickelodeon, which is not good considering that Paramount is open in their support of Israel's genocide and occupation of Palestine by supporting Zionism. In fact, WildBrain and Paramount announced that Prime is airing on Nickelodeon too. Full transparency, I downloaded everything used here, if you know what I mean, and encourage others to do the same. I don't really care if people watch this media or whatever because the issue is too broad to fully overturn the companies themselves. The extent of supporting artists only comes up as a reactive statement toward the concept of boycotting or divestment from genocidal institutions, to frame those who refuse to financially support Paramount as not caring about an underclass of those in the film and TV industry. It becomes very apparent in how often this comes up in response to people talking about the Sonic films. I support the artists serves as a justification to ignore Paramount's support of Israel's genocide and occupation of Palestine. Yet none of this energy was there when talking about the background conditions behind Sonic Prime's production, when talking about strikes, the pandemic, AI, budgets, mandates, or deadlines. It doesn't read as a genuine support for the artists in any way, if it's only selectively applied in the context of prioritizing looking the other way. I've never been of the opinion that not supporting Paramount media, including the Sonic 3 movie or now Sonic Prime, has ever been a method that will make a difference to them. I knew it would be a box office hit from the start. My perspective is more that if you have a means of financially purchasing these things, then divert that funding toward other causes, like the people affected by the genocide. Imagine if even 1% of the people who supported it instead funded people displaced and disabled by genocide, funded the causes for the people, many of whom you can and should check and support if you can. They're vetted and everything. You can get the same end result because you can easily just pirate said media right now if you check for it. It's less about ending all genocide and occupation, it's about supporting the people harmed by it. You'd be surprised, getting comments by people acting like I'm asking them to grow crops or go without food and water to pirate a Sonic movie is certainly an experience. There are plenty of parents just taking their kids to something and likely don't even know. I encourage them to do the same, and not support, but I also understand if they're not even in the know. That's not really who I'm reaching out to here. Paramount doesn't give a shit about changing, and it's not realistic to amass enough people to force some kind of change. That isn't really the goal here. The point is getting people to recognize the power even just a few bucks can do to support others in need. Some people also point out that Paramount isn't a BDS target and cite the BDS page saying too many protests will make things harder. That said, the Sonic 3 movie is not a necessity. The very same BDS page also goes on to point out that these decisions of what you should or should not boycott are also context sensitive. Amazon, for instance, is a pressure target, and due to the pandemic and the material reality for people depending on their living circumstances, particularly disabled people, boycotting them becomes far less feasible compared to the others. This is also why they're a pressure target. That's why a target like, say, not financially supporting a film that already hit the download sites pretty quickly is a simple but effective way of making a tangible difference for even the one person you financially support instead. I share crowdfunding posts for people on the regular, and fund as many as I can myself. I'll be honest with you, seeing and hearing and listening to this community, there's no discussion needed in what I'm going to do. Choosing between people literally being genocided isn't even something that requires thought for me. Palestinians are not a dead, doomed people. They're a living, active community. If you want, I have a whole cited post already that details this in greater depth. For this video, I'd like to spotlight 90 Ghost, who does unimaginable work in vetting accounts for Palestinians crowdfunding. If you can, support him and his family. Link is in the description. As always, thank you for watching. If you take nothing else from this, it's to approach criticism and engaging with media from a place of love. I stand with animation.